we begin, allow me to invite Bapak Ferry, the head of Economics Department, to deliver welcoming speech. Please welcome Bapak Dr. Ferry Prasetya. The time is yours.
Thank you, Miss Halail. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang. Good morning. Good morning, Professor Mehmet Asutay, and good afternoon for all of us. And ladies and gentlemen, and also distinguished Professor, Associate Professor Mehmet Asutay, and our moderator, Miss Laila Pimada, our colleagues also in Faculty of Economics, Universitas Brawijaya, and our beloved student. On behalf of the Department of Economics, Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Brawijaya, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all participants of the 3-in-1 series online event. This event with the theme Islamic, Moral Economic, and Political Economics is a platform for intellectual discourse and knowledge sharing on the intersection of Islamic, moral economy, and political economics. And we are honored to have Professor Mehmet Asutay from the Durham University as our esteemed speaker for this event. And Professor Asutay is a renowned expert in Islamic political economy, Islamic moral economics, and also Islamic banking. And his research contribution have been widely recognized, and he has published numerous articles and books on this subject. So if we look to the topics, the concept of moral economy has been discussed in various contexts, including its relationship with political economics. In the case of Islamic moral economic itself as a foundation for an alternative economic system that aims to be both unique and egalitarian. This system implies the importance of serving not only self-interest, but also social interest with a framework that removes conflict between the two. And Islamic moral economy presents a challenge to the dominant capitalist system, as is offer an alternative that prioritizes the ethical consideration and social justice. And understanding the principle and implication of Islamic moral economics is part of the crucial for policymakers, economists, and also the scholars, and it can contribute to the development of more inclusive and sustainable economic system. And I would like to thank for all the participants for joining us today, and I encourage you to actively participate in the discussion, ask a question, and share your insight. Your engagement is integral to the discuss of this event. Once again, welcome to the 3-in-1 series on Islamic moral economy and political economics. I hope that this event inspires fruitful discussion, sparks new ideas, and enrich our understanding of these critical subjects matters. Thank you once again, Professor Mehmet, and may Allah bless us all in our pursuit of knowledge and understanding. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning and good afternoon.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Bapak Ferry Prasetya. All right, now we have to come to our main agenda, the guest lecture about Islamic moral and political economy. So this session will be running for 60 minutes and consists of 30 minutes presentation from Prof. Mehmet, and then the last 30 minutes, of course, for the discussion. Prof. Mehmet is professor of the Middle Eastern and Islamic Political, Economic, and Finance at Durham University Business School. Prof. Mehmet also the director of the Durham Center in Islamic Economic and Finance. And right now, as we all know, the Islamic moral and political economics is a topic that not only digs into complexities of economic and political system, but also leans heavily on Islamic ethical and moral roots. So it provides a distinct viewpoint on the government, income distribution, and social justice. So without further ado, please welcome Prof. Mehmet Asutay.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here. And thank you very much also giving an opportunity to get the topic on the Islamic political and moral economy to your audience, to the students and other participants here. As mentioned, it is an important, but at the same time, terribly ignored area. Because at the end of the day, beyond neoclassical economics, economy rather than economics is a product of intersection between different areas of life, but also different disciplines. Neoclassical economics, however, relegated all these interactions into just economic behavior and economic incentives. However, we live in multi-dimensional world, and whether it is sociology, whether it is economics, politics, psychology, every one of such aspects have impact on our choices and also the structures that we have. In other words, the structures, the agencies, those relationships are important for us to understand. And therefore, a system understanding is essential for us to be able to develop a new and alternative ways of organizing life. And that includes economic life as well, rather than a very partial analysis of what the reality is. And therefore, in this presentation, I thought I had 50 minutes, but I'll try my best in 30 minutes. Try to explore the ideas of Islamic moral and political economy with you, hopefully. And hopefully, such subject area can be expanded within your realm as well in different programs, so that the narrative of developing an alternative system should not be relegated only Islamic banking, but it can go beyond, and we can search for different system understanding. In particular, of course, when you have this sustainability debate around us, the inability of neoclassical economics to deliver sustainable economies in particular is important, and the struggle and the difficulties with that. And therefore, sustainable development requires a systemic response, a system understanding, a political economy understanding, and hopefully within the given 30 minutes, I'll try my best to articulate. Now, I'll start with this quotation from Sherlock Holmes, the great English detective stories. And this is particularly important for us because in terms of disturbance and disruption, because with the emergence of Islamic finance, there was this expectation that an alternative way of organizing economy and finances could be possible, and therefore disruption of the market system can be possible, and Islamic economics in terms of theory, construction, and application can be possible. However, that disruption did not take place. As the quotation goes, Gregory would ask, is there any point that the directives, the officers would wish to draw the attention then the officer will say that nothing happened in the night in relation to the dog, because dog were outside and supposed to bark when there is something. And by definition, there has to be something in the night that the dog should be barking. And then the detective would ask, the dog did nothing in the nighttime? And then the officer will say that, yeah, that was the curious incident. It did not bark. So the curious incident for us here is that the Islamic finance should have disrupted the system, but it hasn't. It has disrupted the capitalist neoclassical system, but that disruption has not taken place. So that's something that we should be concerned. In other words, whether the story is just moving capital A from A to B and looking at whether this capital movement is halal, whether that's the story, or the story is that, look, we are moving A to capital from A to B, but one, what is the source of this capital? And two, and importantly also, what is the consequence that we are producing? What outcomes that we are producing? And of course, whether that movement is halal or not. So rather than just relegating the story to one aspect, whether moving capital from A to B is halal, but looking at what's the source of that capital, and then the consequences together with the processes. Unfortunately, in the current system, what we have, it is only the transferring of capital from A to B, whether that is conducted halal or not. We do not look at the whole beginning of the story, where the capital comes from, what is capital, and also what outcomes that we produce. So these are important for us, and because this is the story of the neoclassical economics as well, because we are talking about sustainability, but unfortunately, we are told that we are not supposed to ask what happens before, or what is capital, for instance. We don't need to ask that, how capital emerges and all that. We are just asked to look at the outcomes. What is that outcome? Oh, we have done it, and unfortunately, we have some negative externalities on environment, climate. Let's correct it. But what happened? Why we have this climate problem and etc. No, you don't need to ask about that. And therefore, a disruption is essential. As Ali Shariati would say, I came to disrupt. We have to disrupt in order to be able to constitute an alternative ways to make life better for everyone. And therefore, whatever we have around us is not necessarily innocent. The words, the concepts, the ideas, nothing is innocent. They all have certain meanings attached to them. I wish we had time. I could just play the clip from this movie called Malcolm X. And I would suggest you to watch the movie, because in this particular, Malcolm X is a Black American leader, emerged later, but previously have a very disturbing life, and he ends up in prison, and in prison meets with some Nation of Islam people, and they try to train him because the potential he has. In this particular part, Nation of Islam guys take Malcolm X to the library. As you can see, the dictionary is there. So they want to show him how the words have different meanings when it is socially constructed. Everything is socially constructed. So he opens the dictionary, the section white, because these are Black people. And so he opens the white, and anything and everything in life relating to beauty, goodness, nice, everything is expressed as white. But then he says, let's look at. He opens the black section, anything and everything that is bad, that is horrible, that is negative, that is should be avoided, is black. So you see how the words, the way it is defined, has impact why everything in life should be black, negativity should be black, and why everything that is good should be described with white. So these are important issues for us, the language, the way we construct. So similar things, when we look at economics, what is economics? You have been doing economics, and you are doing economics, some of you. And when we look at the definition of economics, it starts with a particular assumption about human. It will tell us that human is rational because God is dead. So the knowledge from God is no longer relevant. And therefore human faculty is hegemonic, and therefore human is rational, self-maximizing, and all those definitions. Maximizing utility, maximizing profit, and all. So a particular assumption, particular definition of human. However, then you look at different societies, different ontologies, such as Islam. Islam says that no, God is not dead. God is very much here. The Quran is here, and Quran directly informs us how to organize life around us. And therefore, our behavior has to be shaped within the divine knowledge that is given to us. So the first assumption directly goes there. No, the source of knowledge is Quran, is divine knowledge, and exists. Then with that, of course, definition of human comes. Who is human? And that human is very much falah oriented. In other words, trying to reach salvation, happiness in this world, but in line with salvation and happiness in the hereafter. You see, again, the definition of human, and therefore the assumption of economics has entirely changed. Rather than a maximizing individual, you have a different definition of human, that human who is obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the divine knowledge, and within that directly identifies a particular path for salvation in this world and salvation in the hereafter. And therefore, as you can see, economy becomes an instrument, not an objective. However, in the conventional analysis, economic incentive is the main incentive. You want to maximize, okay? You want to maximize your profit, you want to maximize your utility. But in the Islamic, entire story changes, and that economy becomes only an instrument to reach a particular objective. What is that objective? To please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore reach salvation in this world and in hereafter. As you can see, different paradigms, entirely different paradigms. Of course, and this is what we call embeddedness. In other words, economy is only an instrument and is embedded into Islamic value system. And within that value system, it is just the instrument to facilitate the life, but it is not an end in itself. However, in conventional worldview, economic incentives are the end in themselves. So therefore, we would be in our teaching economics, the economic incentives. We would say that people are motivated by economic incentives. However, here within the Islamic realm, people are incentivized rather than economic incentives. They are motivated by religious incentives. So those distinctions are important for us to understand. And that is very much the systemic response and a political economy approach. And therefore, all these confusions that we have around us, and some of these confusions, of course, is not just confusion, but paradigma. Paradigms that we have around us impose on us with a particular understanding. And therefore, in recent years, in responding to the failures of economics, the organization of finance and the whole financialization, different ways of rescuing process have been put forward, whether it's the Millennium Development Goals, whether the ESGs, whether the SDGs, whether it is green financing, impact financing, investing, responsible investing, social impact investing, and et cetera, et cetera. And today, it's not that long that the sustainability debate started. Since 2015 in particular, globally, what we are discussing greenwashing and confusion. And therefore, similar responses within Islamic finance. And today we are talking about the maqasid washing. Because everyone talks about maqasid, but they are replicating a conventional logic rather than developing an Islamic logic. So that's important for us to understand. One important concept that I like you guys to look into, the logic. So Islamic logic versus the market system logic. Two different logics here. And each one of them would refer. Of course, there are different logics, but because we are today discussing Islamic and therefore Islamic logic. Having said that, of course, strangely enough, with the Sustainable Development Goals, what we see is the global morality. A new morality is emerging, as opposed to Friedmanian understanding in 1960s that the only social objective firms have is to maximize profit, coming to the recognition that sustainability is important. So that's an important departure in the conventional sense. However, because it does not question the initial question, it's still the dominance of capital, and therefore, despite the fact that sustainability debate represents a global new morality, emerged morality, unfortunately, is not going to be able to solve the problem that we have in front of us, because it doesn't question the initial equation. Initial equation is still the dominance of capital, profitability of capital, and how capital shapes our world. And therefore, the importance of Islamic logic. And within that sustainability, therefore, everyone talks one way or other sustainability. And the more capitalist, the most capitalist to the most ethical individual, everyone refers to sustainability, but whether they refer to the same thing. And therefore, the initial equation and equal accessibility to resources will be the deterministic factor, whether we are referring to a systemic response to the problem, and hence we are developing a political economy response or not. In other words, if we are to continue with the existing modes of production that only based on capital and labor, and even in that labor is dominated by capital, unfortunately, we are not going to be able to solve the sustainability problem, because your equation does not include land, does not include environment, does not include climate. So if your equation does not include all those important factors, how are we going to solve the problem? Even within the economics terminology, you won't be able to solve, because you have what you call in econometrics omitted variables in the system. So if variables are omitted in the system, how the optimization will take place so that we can respond to the climate problem? So therefore, we have to look into the initial equation, and that's a political economic question. That's a moral economic question. Because at the end of the day, our objective is to securing the human lives, environment, and society. And that requires, therefore, this initial equation that we have around us, which has been imposed on the rest of the world since the nation states, emergence of nation states in the in the rest of the world in the 20th century, and a Western understanding, a paradigm that has been imposed, but in particular since 1978, entirely since late 1970s, entirely imposed on rest of the world, the end of history discourse. In other words, liberalism is the only way of organizing societies, and there isn't any other way. The end of history discourse by Fukuyama, for instance. And therefore, a real solution involves empowering all the stakeholders, but that requires, of course, definition of what those stakeholders are, such as when Islamic banks are organized, the governance system is aligned with the Anglo-Saxon tradition of shareholder value maximization. And then Islam suggests something else. And however, the logic, market system logic, is the maximization of the shareholder value. However, Islam suggests an extended stakeholding, recognizing, in addition to capital, recognizing labor, but land, environment, society, and other stakeholders in the equation. So the inconsistency, therefore, with the way we organize the logic of Islamic Bank, on the other hand, the logic of Islam is the tension, and therefore, whatever the meeting we organize, we always discuss this difficulty whether Islamic banks are Islamic or not, because that's the problematic part, the inconsistency between the logic, whether the Islamic logic is there. And therefore, the objective has to be identified. And hence, I love this definition you guys have in Indonesia. Whatever the conference I go in Indonesia, whether it is very high-powered individuals, whether it's vice president, whether it's leading individuals, they would always refer to Islamic economics as Rahmatul Alamin. And that's a beautiful definition, that the comprehensiveness, okay? So it is not only a rahmah to the capital owners, because they have capital and therefore they can maximize, but it is for everyone and for everything. So this extended stakeholding nature of Islamic political economy, Islamic moral economy, that's the important story for us. And because what you have, the huge domination of finance and the financialization that we have, the world GDP is only 8.3% of the total financial assets in the world in 2021. And that's something that we should be concerned, because the whole objective, the whole domination, we are ruled by finance and financialization. However, finance cannot be source of wealth. It is just an instrument. And therefore, as you can see as well, against every 87 USD cent real asset, there's a 10.44 financial claims, fictitiousness, entire fictitiousness that is happening. Finance is ruling us, unfortunately. So therefore, and when we look at, however, there are problems, such as the climate problem. During COVID, UNDP's People's Climate Vote in 2020, with 1.2 million people polled across 50 countries, despite the COVID, 64% suggested that climate and sustainable development are the most emergency problems that we have around us. Because as you can see with finance, with the increased finance that we have, this financial inclusion story, which tells us very innocent story, it sounds, but it is not. With financial inclusion, we are bringing more people into the debtness. And with that, of course, mostly goes to the consumption expenditure. Look at this picture, for instance, the remains from the humans, the way we consume, the way we therefore pollute, because we have access to capital through borrowing, okay? However, look at the nature, how it is organized. Look at the impact of birds and the turtles on the beach, and look at the human, okay? Why? Because we have access, and therefore we do not have the value. And hence this distinction between circular economy and the linear economy, this linear growth that is imposed on us by the neoclassical economics as well as the Enlightenment worldview. And as you can see here, those of you familiar with the UK, you have this dog races. Okay, on the right hand side, or sorry, on the left hand side, you will see the rails. So in the rails, they will put a mechanic rabbit. Okay, it's automated, and they will press, and the dogs will run because they think that there's a rabbit there to catch. Okay, but that's not a real rabbit. It's a mechanic. It's a metal rabbit, but it's running. So they incentivize the dogs to run faster. They have this automated rabbit running. However, in the end, there is no rabbit, of course. And this is something the linear economy has imposed on us. We are running, okay? But what is the end result? And hence, again, a paradigmatic difference between linear growth. It is a race, it is imposed, but linear growth would require from one year to another, the economy should grow in a particular manner, 5%, 3%, whatever it is, or the businesses. But the resources that we have in the world anymore is not responding, is not enough, the way we consume. So the way the resources are not enough for this linear growth anymore, and therefore the resource problem has become an important issue. So how we are going to overcome that, therefore this linear growth has to be replaced by the growth if necessary. We have to reduce the growth. We have to reduce the materials that we use in our production consumptions, and hence the circular economy importance. And therefore, it is not the corporations that the people. And therefore, it is very important for us, and because the whole objective has turned into how corporations can make profits around us, whether it is the oil, whether it is the electricity, whether it is the main goods that have been turned into commodities that we have around us are controlled by corporations. But it is very much important, such as Timur Kuran, one of the critics of Islamic economics, would say that, look, a Muslim world could not develop because one of the reasons for that is Muslims did not develop corporations as an institutional form of capital, and therefore they could not move capital. So he would tell you that this is one of the reasons of underdevelopment. But that is an amazing quality of Islam, because resource accumulation and resource accessibility cannot be dominated by a corporation. Remember, in Islam, three things. These are important political economic consequences for us. You cannot commodify air. You cannot commodify fire, that's oil, for instance, and you cannot commodify water. You cannot leave these things like commodified, and you cannot leave them to corporations. So Islamic political economy, when we look at historically, did not produce corporations so that the resources can be accessible by everyone, rather than controlled by corporations. And today where we are, as you can see, people are protesting that corporations are dominating, and therefore in a country like United Kingdom, you have energy problem because corporations are hiking the prices, and poor people cannot have access to enough gas to heat their homes, as well as enough electricity. So by corporations dominating. However, Islamic political economy does not accept, to the extent Islamic fiqh even does not accept the third persons as an entity to be side to a transaction, okay? Despite the fact that Islamic banks are corporations, but Islamic fiqh does not recognize. You have to be a real person in Islamic law to be side to a transaction, okay? So that's an amazing, again, political economic consequence for us. Corporations cannot dominate. And therefore, when we look at here, the resource accessibility is an important consequence for us, because in Islamic political economy, Allah created all the resources for everyone to have access to the resources. Everyone should be able to have access. Of course, I wouldn't consider football or any game as a resource, but this is the best picture that I could locate in social media to explain. As you can see, there are barriers to resources. And when there is barrier, of course, you have domination as well, capitalist domination. And when you apply equality, you cannot solve the problem because some of us do not have enough. And justice, and that is the whole concern and objective of Islam, ensuring justice is established with ihsan, al-adala wal-ihsan. Okay, so therefore, even some of us is in negative, domination is terribly high, and therefore equity and justice can be the only solution to provide people with equity. However, that does not solve the entire problem, because resource accessibility is through the barrier is prevented, and therefore you have to, what you have to do, distribution. So taking from the powerful, rich, to give to others. And that is important because in our circles, everyone refers to prohibition of riba related verses in the Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, but no one talks about the ayat, the verse 71 in Surah Al-Nahl, because there what you will find, it will say that we have favored to some of you, so favored in the sense that we have given you the wealth so that you can help others to come to equality point. Help the others, you are here, the others down here, so you help them others come to the similar point, equality. And that is what we call ihsan. Those who are powerful expected to reach, expected to give up for the favor of the others who do not have, so that the equality can be established in the society. And that is what we call establishing equilibrium. In other words, ihsan. So adala and ihsan always together in the Islamic political economy. So when justice is not enough, and the rich can help others to come to the similar point to establish equilibrium in the society so that everyone has accessibility to resources. However, Islamic, therefore, the change is essential. And that change, on the one hand, bringing justice, and iqtisad, the term for economics in Islam, iqtisad is very much related with definition of justice. So therefore, our objective, as you can see on the right-hand side, without distribution, giving people the accessibility, because resources are created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore people should have access. Okay, justice would be when people have access to the resources that Allah created for them. Okay, even to that extent, what is the liberty, entirely freeing people from dependence, removing the barriers. That is the ultimate objective of Islamic political, moral economy, removing the barriers. And therefore, nowadays, for instance, in Indonesia, everyone talks about the importance of Islamic social finance, zakat, and waqf. That's amazing, of course, and because Islam enshrines zakat in the Quran, and ihsan as expression of waqf is very much enshrined again in the Islamic tradition. But what is important also to us, yes, zakat is important, waqf is important, we have to do. But the question, an important political economic question that we have to ask, why poor is poor? Why poor do not have access to resources? And that's the political economic question. That's the question that we have in these pictures that I have been depicting here. So why poor is poor? And the political economic question, therefore, is to open up, bring that liberty so that the people have access to resources that Allah created. However, if that doesn't solve the problem, then the ihsan, when you establish justice If that is not enough, then the ihsan requires establishing that equilibrium in the society. So these are important political, economic questions for us to respond in the Islamic. Of course, when we look at Islamic finance emerged with the idea to solve the problem. But again, disruption, as I mentioned in the beginning, that disruption did not happen. The dog did not bark in the night. And therefore, when we look at the distribution of financing from Islamic banks, heavily financialized as well. Their financing goes to a lot to the financialized areas. As you can see in the figures, unfortunately, the productive sphere, the finances goes to productive sphere is much lesser than the amount of financing goes to financial sphere from Islamic banks. Similarly, when we look at the particular sectors that Islamic finance allocates resources or their financing is again very much consumer durables, real estate, and the financial markets, the same result. In other words, it's not that equilibrium that we are referring. Again, when we look at the particular structures or the particular financing structures used, again, heavily debt-based financing structures are used by Islamic banks in the countries that that has presence. So these are important issues for us to the extent that when we look at how tabarruk, organized tabarruk, of course, Indonesia doesn't have, and that's something that we have to celebrate, how organized tabarruk is becoming dominant, okay? And hence creating debt, entirely debt-based financing system, which will produce the same financialization. Again, when we look at Islamic banking and conventional banks with the Indonesian data, for instance, we see certain productive areas, the distribution of financing from Islamic banks and conventional banks. And we see in the productive side, for instance, manufacturing industry, as you can see, Islamic banks only allocated 6.3%, however, conventional banks 16%. Agriculture, Islamic banks 4.64%, and conventional banks 7.17%. In other words, Islamic banks, unfortunately, following the same institutional logic as conventional. And therefore, the heavy presence of capitalism, and unfortunately, with Islamic finance, we think that we have solved the problem. No. We have exaggerated the problem, unfortunately. Therefore, the whole definition of what is finance, it is not only an Islamic position, but even Schiller, a Nobel Prize winner, would say that finance is not making money. It is just a function. It is just an intermediation to facilitate the process. It is not an end in itself, okay? And therefore, we have to bring that into our realm because that's the Islamic paradigm. Islamic paradigm would not consider finance as an end in itself. It is just a means. And therefore, this particular definition, the quotation that you have up there, it is a photograph I took when I was passing through Brussels, and I saw this financial institution has this beautiful definition inscribed on the wall. It says the finance, the art of protecting and financing people. That is the whole objective of finance. It is only protecting and financing people. It is not creating financialization for the sake of making money. So these are important consequences for us to understand. Therefore, the importance of political economy for us to discuss what political economy. So therefore, within the political economy understanding, when we look at the emergence of institutions, in order to create this embedded institution, organic institutions, okay? So you would have culture or the value system, that's the norms, together with the cognitive repertoire of the society, the roles are defined and the institutions, theories, concepts will emerge. In other words, in our case, Islamic value system that results in Islamic norms, together with cultural repertoire. For instance, when Islam went to Indonesia, there was the cultural repertoire. So Islamic norms would look at the cultural repertoire of that society together, and they will determine the roles. So what do we mean by roles? That is what capital is, what labor is, what is land, who owns capital, why, how long, and all those questions. Who owns land, why, and how long? Who is laborer, why, and how? So all these roles have to be defined to constitute a political economy, concepts, theories, and institutions in the end. So this is important. So when we look at from here, can we say, for instance, Islamic banking is a product of this system, or it is imported logic for us? In other words, in order to be considered as organic, every ontology has to produce its own meaning and institutions of everyday life. Historically, when we look at Islam, within the Islamic ontology, produce its own solutions. But in the modern time, of course, the difficulties, the political impositions and all that, the meaning and the institutions of everyday life, we are taking and Islamizing it rather than constituting ourselves in an organic sense. So these are important issues for us to consider. Time is an issue, therefore I'm just running, and hence the importance of institutional logic for us to consider. So when we look at institutional logic as the base of a political economy, as you can see from the definition, it is socially constructed historical patterns of material practices, assumptions, values, beliefs, and rules by which the individual produce and reproduce their material subsistence, organize time and space, and provide meaning to their social reality. So that is, it implies that Islamic ontology, therefore, by definition, provides a particular understanding of everyday life, and Western ontology provides a different meaning. But because by taking their institutions, we are negating the Islamic and entirely focusing on or shaping our lives with the institutional logic of Western capitalism. And therefore, embedded agency, it implies that in our case, the Muslim embedded into Islamic value system have to reflect on that, on their economic and the financial behavior as well. And therefore is institutional logic, Islamic institutional logic versus the market system logic is an important factor for us to look into. In other words, going back to the essence of political economy, Islamic institutional logic is, it looks at defines human in a particular way and locates human within the universe in a particular place. And therefore, we are referring to falah individual, an individual who seeks salvation in this world and in the hereafter with the ihsanic condition and governance. On the other hand, when we look at the neoclassical economics, rational, self-maximizing, unbounded rationality, and shareholder value maximization. In response to that, Islam would consider bounded rationality, and rather than self-maximizing, an individual who looks for maximizing of the welfare of the society as well by considering the hereafter consequences at the same time. Different paradigm, as you can see. And therefore, rather than shareholder value maximization, it is extended stakeholder value maximization because Allah created all the resources. And therefore, referring to earlier, as I mentioned, we would expect each ontology to produce its own outcomes, its own processes, its own solutions. But what we have done with the Islamization of knowledge, as you can see on the right-hand side, rather than producing our own institutional solution theories and concepts, we have taken the secular Western modernity's solutions through the fiqh process, and we have Islamized them. So we have brought the conventional logic to Islam without defining what is capital, what is labor, what is land, what is climate, and etc. We have just taken it and we created Islamic banks as a solution. So therefore, these are important issues for us to consider because the solutions that we are expecting, such as in the case of Indonesia, rather than expecting Islamic banks to come back to come to the center to help the Indonesians, you guys came up with the DMTs. Amazing institutional form directly emerged from society to respond to society's problem by mobilizing zakat, charity, and other means. So as you can see, it emerges from the society. It's an embeddedness. Time is an issue, I know. I'll try to finish in 10 minutes, apologies. And therefore, we have to look at what is political economy. So when we look at political economy beyond economics is the social laws that governs the production and distribution. And therefore, it produces its own tools, institutions, and human energies to produce goods and services. And therefore, it is important to understand the political economy, such as the question that we have. Just to summarize, and then I'll finish with what is Islamic political economy, moral economy. Just the simple questions that you have here, very simple, very silly at the same time. Whether 5 is superior to 4, 4 is superior to 5, or 5 is equal to 4. You have a portfolio which brings 5 return or 4 return. 5 has environmental consequences and has riba. 4 doesn't have environmental consequences or riba included as a return. So which one is better for you? It is 4. But we are always told that 5 is superior. So as you can see, when you bring the value to the linearity that it is imposed on us, so value, when we impose value, what is that value? Riba is haram, and we cannot undermine the interests of environment, for instance, immediately the equation changes. So 4 that doesn't include is better than 5 for you now, okay? Of course, sometimes it could be the case that 5 doesn't have riba or doesn't have environmental consequences and can be better, but it is not one solution that 5 is always superior to 4. Okay, so when you impose value, the equation immediately changes. And that is very much the political economic consequence that we are discussing. Same thing, when you look at here, for instance, whatever you have around you, these are important definition issues, whatever you have around you, whether it is your right or it is privilege. The capitalist system, the Enlightenment ontology will tell you that it is your right. Therefore, you can maximize, okay? However, religious ontology, including Islam, will say that everything that you have around you is privilege. And therefore, you cannot maximize. You have to consider others, other stakeholders, and importantly, hereafter. And therefore, a different political economy that we are discussing. And within that, of course, therefore, the whole Islamic political economy is directly refers. Every ontology, including Islamic ontology, would be expressed with a worldview. The Islamic worldview based on Tawheed. Okay, so Tawheed has important implication for us. And therefore, that will determine the values, norms, and axioms that will produce us a social formation, how we organize the society around resources. And therefore, it brings a system understanding in the end. That system, such as the Islamic system that we are discussing, a particular definition have to organize society around the resources that we have, okay? And through that, you will define how the modes of productions, they come together. In other words, what we call is the modes of production have to organize society. But at the same time, you have to identify the the whole agency and the structured relationships, okay? And therefore, historically, you had different civilization with different ontologies, and Islam has a particular ontology. Within that ontology, therefore, you will define what is labor, what is capital, what is laborer, what's the relationship, what is land, who owns land, why, how long, and etc. So that's a political economy, the essence of political economy for us to respond. And therefore, within that, when we look at the definition of iqtisad versus the economics. Now, this is important for us to understand, therefore, the political economy. Iqtisad is an Arabic word, although it is translated as economics, but no, it is beyond economics. The Rahmatul Alamin emerges here, therefore. When we look at the roots is qasd and the qasd. Qasd directly refers to directing towards an objective through path in line with an aim, equable and temperate. Qasd, however, is just share and hence justice. Therefore, iqtisad relates giving the right of everything to locate everything in its place and establishing justice. And therefore, it consequently tells us it is emancipation and empowerment, stakeholding-centered development, embeddedness in the social formation of society, as opposed to a classical understanding of methodological rationalism, self-maximizing, efficiency, shareholder maximization, and accumulation. You see two entirely different paradigms, two different definition, Islamic political economy versus the neoclassical economics. On the one hand, Islamic equity, falah-seeking individual, establishing ihsan society. On the other hand, self-maximizing individual. So these are important consequences for us to understand. Okay, and therefore, Islamic political economy is something that that has to be studied to be able to understand the objective. So I'll finish with the moral economy as well. Therefore, when we look at the whole conceptualization of the ontology of Islamic moral economy, it is the justice. The definition of iqtisad directly tells us justice. And justice is not enough, as we mentioned, and therefore the importance of ihsan, through ihsan, how we establish equilibrium in the society. And importantly, the way Allah created the world has to be sustained, because Allah created the world with mizan, a particular order, and that order has to be sustained. Because whatever we have around us as stakeholders are amana for us, a trust. And therefore, we have to ensure that everything has the potential to grow. And therefore, the Islah, the reformation is important for us to reform, to ensure that it is an imperative to ensure that that equilibrium continues. And therefore, when we look at Islamic moral economy, what we are discussing here with the structure of Islamic political economy, it starts with Tawheed. And Tawheed directly refers to complementarity and unitarity. What it means, everything and everyone complements each other, okay? So I complement you, you complement me, we complement environment, and etc., the complementarities. And therefore, the interests of all the stakeholders have to be considered in the initial equation. So you cannot rule out when you have a production function, such as Cobb-Douglas production function that we teach, it only have capital domination. Now, you have to have all the stakeholders in the equation. And therefore, the importance of adalah. So when you consider the interests of all the stakeholders in your equation, that is adalah, justice. And therefore, when justice is not enough to establish that equilibrium in the society, the importance of ihsan. That is because tazkiyah, which means the growth, yes, growth is important, but growth has to be in harmony with the growth interests of all the stakeholders. It is not only my growth, but the growth of other stakeholders in the process as well is essential for us to consider. Why? Because Allah created everything that we have around us, human as well as everything that we have around us, with a potential to reach their perfection. and we have to give that potential to perfection to all the stakeholders, including all human beings, so that they can reach their potential. The opportunity space has to be given. And why? Because whatever we have around us is amana, it's a trust. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made certain actions as mandatory in the Quran, such as giving the zakat. Zakat is mandatory. Why? Because Allah created all the resources for everyone to have access, but with privatization, we are, of course, expropriating the resources, and therefore we have to compensate the society who are excluded from the resources, okay? And why? Because we are, as Khalifa of Allah on earth, we have the responsibility to deliver that. We have to ensure that the rights of each stakeholders are distributed so that we can establish the solidarity. And why? The methodology of that is the Maqasid al-Sharia. Let's remember that the whole objective of Sharia is the well-being of all the stakeholders in the process, whether humans, whether others, but in a consequential manner. So therefore, that results in what we have here, that results in certain qualities. In other words, the conventional economy is a political economy. They will tell you that what is your value theory? So 3 important questions. I'll finish with that. 3 important questions. You have to respond to your value theory. What is your value theory? 2, what is your modes of production? 3, what is your distribution theory? So value theory is whatever you produce, how you are going to value that, okay? The pen that you have in your hand, it is 5,000 rupiah. Why it is, how you establish that value. And when we look at value theory, 3 approaches. 1, value is established when something is exchangeable in the market. 2, value is established when something is useful. Capitalism and socialism. However, Islam would say that no, everything is valuable because Allah created. What we call is inherent value, okay? So the value is not determined only by market. It is not only determined by use, but it is the inherent value. So the embeddedness. So therefore, justice is essential element of this political economy. And why? Because inherent value determines that. Therefore, in our modes of production, we have to bring the factors of production together. We have to recognize the interests of all the stakeholders in the modes of production. And therefore, when it comes to distribution theory, that is who is going to get what. And therefore, because we recognize all the stakeholders and their interests within justice, then the value theory will result in a just distribution theory. And therefore, embeddedness, everything is embedded within the Islamic moral economy, political economy. It is very much collective action. It is the importance of community, the mutuality. Nothing can be fictitious. It has to be the fictitiousness and commodification, such as we mentioned, has to be goods rather than commodity. And that is what the Islamic moral economy would tell you. In other words, as Borda would say, as opposed to the position of neoclassical economics, it is not the prices that determine everything, but everything that determines prices. And that's an amazing consequence for us to consider as part of the Islamic moral economy. It is not the prices that determines everything, but it is the everything that determines prices, the embeddedness. It is entirely embedded in the Islamic ontology and epistemology. And therefore, the institutional emergence, as you can see on the left-hand side, direct Islamic ontology determines. Okay, so this is the Islamic political and moral economy logics, and that is essential for us to understand. I wish we had more time to go through all this. It's an amazing story, and the new generation, as you guys are, should be able to train in Islamic moral economy and political economy so that you can make a distinction. And therefore, Islamic political and moral economy in the end is based on an order that is the Tawheed, that unitarity and complementarity, that is, we all complement each other to reach unitarity. And therefore, the Islamic worldview that consider life as a privilege, talaq for human and ihsan for society. The social formation, therefore, is embedded, and then the system, whether social, political, legal system, economic system, and all, the importance of Islamic ethical system connecting them. And therefore, within the economic system, you have to respond to modes of production, the value theory and distribution theory of Islam. Of course, from one Muslim society to another, there will be distinction because the fields are different, capitals are different, habitus is different. The geography of Indonesia is different than Saudi Arabia, for instance. The capital that you have in Indonesia is different than Saudi Arabia. The habitus as well is different. But the essential, what is essential? The determining factor of this political economy. That will remain as the main benchmark. Then when it comes to each society horizontally, depending on the realities of that society, but it has to fit into, depending on the field, capital, and the habitus, but whatever the distinctive differences we have has to fit into the main benchmark model, and that is the political economy. There are plenty of issues to discuss, but I will stop here, and therefore I would suggest that in the short run, at least, if we can reach here the logics that we have, because currently what we have Islamized market logic through Islamic banking, which only looks at riba, qarar, maisir, sin industries, and over leverage. However, we have to expand that in the short run on the way to Islamic political and moral economy. At least in the short run, if we can introduce the moral substance screening questions or the consequences onto Islamic banking, whether with our transactions, what consequences we produce, not only prohibition of riba, qarar, maisir, sin industries, and over leverage, but at the same time, whether we are contributing to certain consequences in relation to emancipation and empowerment of human and other stakeholders. So these are important issues. Therefore, it is not always 5, always superior to 4, but sometimes 4 can be superior to 4. And I'll finish with that, and my apologies for taking longer than expected. But this is my passion, and I just wanted to share my passion with you people. I'm sure that we can all work together to establish better futures, but it is time to say something new rather than repeat what is there, and your generation, inshallah, will do that. Thank you. My apologies again.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mehmet. Thank you for the insightful. It is so insightful that maybe our student in the bachelor program will get confused about this kind of information, but at least now we have a new understanding that it is not enough to just using the market logic, right? All right, everyone. Yes. All right, now we are going to the discussion session. Now we have, I think we already have one question. Let me see. Let me take a look in the chat. Okay, there is one question, Prof, from Bapak Gifari. How does the framework of Islamic moral economic actively promote an integrated principle of environmental sustainability and ethical business practice into its core value and operation? Could you please provide specific example or case studies of business or financial institutions that have successfully applied this principle within the context of Islamic finance?
Thank you.
Okay, maybe for other participants, if you have any question, you can raise your hand virtually or you can drop in the chat below. Okay, there is Mr. Anas Budi. Do you want to answer this first or should we hear the other question?
I'll respond to that. Sorry, I changed my headphone. It wasn't working. So this is an important question because we have sustainability. Everyone talks about sustainability. Therefore, when everyone talks about sustainability, we have to be cautious why everyone has interest with different interests have the same expectation. It is again, it goes back to the issues I discussed in the beginning. Everyone refers, but everyone is expecting something different. There was a cover on the magazine called The Banker this week. I was saying that, look, we are expecting banks and financial institutions to work for climate, but they are not disinvesting. They continue as their investment as usual. I think that's an important consequence for us. I worked with a colleague of mine to develop the sustainability guide for Islamic banks. And when we were preparing it, we did conduct a number of interviews, including with Sharia scholars, leading Sharia scholars. The guide is available from Sibafi. You can download from Sibafi. The theoretical part is quite important. I would suggest you guys to read the theoretical part at least. But so one of the Sharia scholars, the leading Sharia scholar we were interviewing, we asked him about sustainability because we were developing the guide. And he said that, look, it sounds good, but we cannot afford, Islamic banks cannot afford. Then we told him that, look, even the conventional banks are doing sustainability. He said that, well, they can afford it because they have been around for many years, 300, 400 years. They have accumulated enough and then they can do it. You see, this very basic understanding is entirely financial intermediation-based understanding doesn't have. And therefore, there are different attempts in banks, conventional banks and Islamic banks, but we have to be realistic. Why an institution which aims at shareholder value maximization should be bothered with sustainability? Because at the end of the day, such as this Sharia scholar would tell us that, look, we have shareholders and they have expectations. We cannot do sustainability. Simple. So the institutional logic doesn't have. Of course, on the surface, we would have green sukuk, we will have this and that. Indonesia has been successful in green sukuk, issuing green sukuk. But most of these green sukuks, which can be successful, they are sovereign green sukuk rather than corporate. And therefore, to be honest, I'm not pessimistic person by definition, but I'm not expecting corporate sector, including Islamic banks, to heavily invest into sustainability discourse as well as the practice. And therefore, as part of civil society, the strength is with us. We have to, as part of civil society, we have to organize. We have to push Islamic banks towards a new agenda. We have to exert our voices as well as the particular position that we have, so that we can force Islamic banks do certain sustainability related financing. As I have shared with you, the whole sustainability consequence. I shared with you the distribution of financing from Islamic banks. As you can see, unfortunately, they are not contributing as such, and therefore it is important for us, okay, to put our efforts together. However, again, in order to help you to understand better, I didn't have time to go through this, but we mentioned about political economy has to have a modes of production, value theory, and distribution theory. Now, you are doing sustainability, which implies that other stakeholders have to be taken into account. Look at the capitalist production function. It has capital and labor. And labor is determined. This is the usual solo growth model that you have, you study, or the Cobb-Douglas production function that you study, usual neoclassical production function. So K and L, capital and labor. And labor is determined by K, because K capital will get alpha, and whatever it decides to give to labor, labor will get 1 minus alpha. And then the technology. The Marxist production function will consider the value is produced by labor, and therefore labor is dominant. but the Islamic one. Now, in the first and the second production function, as you can see, environment is not there, the land is not there, and labor is commodified version of human, so it's not recognized. How you are going to produce an outcome in favor of all the stakeholders, including environment and climate? So you won't be able to do, because it's not recognized. And therefore, the Islamic political economic distinction, because every stakeholder's interests have to be recognized in the equation, not in the consequence in the equation, in the initial equation. And therefore, such as the Islamic production function, it's not labor, but it's human effort, land, environment, capital, society, and other stakeholders, the field, because we have different fields. Indonesia is different field. There are different stakeholders compared to Saudi Arabia, for instance. And important, as you can see the equation, each stakeholder would enter the equation independently rather than determined by the other stakeholder. And therefore, if you look at the superscript, okay, alpha, beta, lambda, and etc., rather than capital determining everything or labor determining everything. Each one of them, because Allah created each stakeholder, so it has to go into equation independently, okay? And also, if that is not enough from the production function, as you can see, there is the constant in front of each factors here, each stakeholder, A, B, C, and etc., okay? So which implies what? From the universal income from the Baitul Mal, if it is not enough, every stakeholder has to receive anything. So this is the way to achieve sustainability, and this is the Islamic logic. Otherwise, with the existing logic, unfortunately, we won't be able to achieve sustainability beyond discourse, and therefore we are talking about the greenwashing, because no one is going to do it. It is not in their interest, because their institutional logic is based on value, shareholder value maximization rather than stakeholder. So therefore, we have to change the paradigm, and the Islamic paradigm, of course, requires a lot of hard work to develop a new system understanding. But at least in the short run, if as part of civil society, if we can put our efforts together to push Islamic banks towards a better paradigm and a better solution, at least by responding to the stakeholder interest, that will be a good solution. And I won't be able to give you a good example, unfortunately, because Islamic banks are commercial Islamic banks as well. Of course, they do some charitable activities and this and that. But again, that's not enough. The paradigm, the logic has to change. It has to change from somewhere, but at least in the short run, if we can ask them, if we can force them to at least include sustainability related issues in their paradigm, that will be something good for us. There are concerns because, again, when we look at the way Islamic financing is developing and going, for instance, when you go, I don't know, the consequences that Islamic finance produces sometimes is something that we should be concerned with. And therefore, even when you go to, for instance, the Kaaba, the Mecca, so what you see, those towers and the buildings, mostly financed by Islamic banks. Even one of the towers, I thought I have a photograph here to share. One of the towers has this definition, the statement in front of the building. What it says, welcome to most elite land. Now, that's a disgrace, to be honest. That's a sacrilege, because Kaaba is supposed to be the most equal place. What is the elite land? You see, those buildings are constructed with Islamic finance sukuk, but even their language is not necessarily correct. For instance, those buildings, those clock towers, it entirely undermines the sustainability of the place. It undermines the historicity of the place. It undermines the spirituality of the place. It's supposed to be the most equal place on earth. yet you have those towers, and those privileged can stay in those towers and enjoy. And the clock tower tells you, look, you can finish, it creates efficiency in doing your umrah even. So these are the consequences, some consequences that we have to be careful. And therefore the civil society, as part of civil society, we have to force Islamic finance industry to produce some sustainability related outcomes, but the power is with the civil society and we have to force. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Prof. Okay, we have a second question, maybe from Mr. Anas Budi. You can turn on your mic.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi, Prof.
Waalaikumsalam.
Alhamdulillah, terima kasih. Very valuable
Waalaikumsalam.
opportunity.
Mas Mari.
Alhamdulillah, Prof. Anyway, Prof, you looks good wearing batik for this
Batik,
morning, Prof.
yeah.
Always
Green
always for,
batik.
Bentar ya.
always
Thank
for
you, Prof.
Indonesia.
Thank you,
I love
Prof.
Indonesia. I love Indonesia.
Thank you. You're
Alhamdulillah.
welcome. Yes.
Prof, I'm very interested in the idea of extended stakeholder that you said just now that Islamic economic switch brings. But do you think, Prof, our Maqasid Syariah now that, for instance, that Al-Ghazali theory, Al-Ghazali approach is or relevant with the concept of the idea of extended stakeholder, as we know that Maqasid Syariah that we have today, Al-Ghazali approach, do not cover the environment or social directly. This is my first question. And the second question is, as this term Islamic moral economy is quite new for us, for Islamic economic student, actually, are there differences or similarities, Prof, between Islamic moral economy and Islamic business and economic ethics, or which one should come first between moral and ethics in terms of epistemology, maybe? This is my second question, and the last question is some of our scholars, Muslim scholars, is translating the sustainable as a toyibah in Islam. Do you agree, Prof, with this? With this translation. Thank you, Bulaila.
Thank you very much for your questions. The first one, if I remember now, what was the first one? Gosh, I forgot.
Maqasid Sharia, Prof.
Maqasid Sharia. Now, in the Maqasid Sharia, of course, most of the references in the Maqasid Sharia refers to Ghazalian understanding. And Ghazalian understanding is terribly limited with 5 categories of Maqasid. And therefore, people like Najatullah Siddiqui, for instance, and in recent years, Auda, in their work on Maqasid al-Sharia, have been suggesting that rather than having a restrictive understanding of Maqasid with 5 categories, perhaps like Najatullah Siddiqui referred to Ibn Qayyim's understanding of policy-oriented Maqasid al-Sharia, which implies that it is open-ended, and it will respond to the policy issues in the society. Now, that's an important issue, because currently the way Maqasid is used, somehow all the Islamic banks are Maqasid, but the outcomes are not. And therefore, we have to look at the difference between intention and the consequence, because currently we are told that what is important is intention. They are not suggesting that the consequence should be taken into account. I consider that as problematic, because Tawheed suggests the unitarity in the knowledge as well. So you cannot divorce intention from the consequence from intention. And therefore, only intention-based Maqasid will not produce the outcomes that we are expecting. Therefore, we have to look at, yes, intention has to be there, but the consequences. Okay, so good intentions, always the catastrophes we had is started with good intentions. So therefore the consequences have to be considered as well, because Maqasid relates to consequences. Okay, you have to produce certain outcomes in relation to the wealth, in relation to the progeny, in relation to all the categories. However, beyond the categories, in Qayyim's understanding of unlimited categories, responding to the needs of the society, what is needed as a maqasid, so deriving maqasid continuously, the way society evolves, I find that more plausible and more important than just classifying it. And therefore, the recent years as well, Auda's work is important. Not only that, the Ghazalian Maqasid has certain problems with it, because if you and me, if we maximize our wealth, what will happen to society? What I call the Adam Smithian problem. So if we maximize or if we protect our wealth, what will happen to the other people and their lives? And that's an important question, because Ghazali and Maqasid talks about the protection of wealth, protection of nest, etc., all those categories. But if we protect all of them, what will happen to the others, the social outcomes, the Adam Smithian problem? Remember, Adam Smith suggested that everyone should maximize. In the end, social welfare will be maximized. No, it didn't happen. It's not going to happen. And therefore, we have to move from the very restrictive Ghazalian Maqasid into larger frameworks, policy-oriented frameworks, in order to be able to locate the outcomes that we are looking into. The second question that you are referring to, business, Islamic business ethics and morality as opposed to moral economy. Now, Islamic business ethics is a part and parcel of Islamic moral economy and political economy. However, essentialization of Islamic business ethics as opposed to Islamic moral and political economy is not an innocent project. What we call is, you might be familiar, Weber suggested in the beginning of 20th century that the Protestant spirit played an important role in the accumulation of capital in the West, and therefore capitalist development has been possible. And he suggested that the Muslims will not be able to achieve that because Islam doesn't allow, and their practices doesn't allow, because he looked at the Ottoman Empire mainly. He considered them just plundering and therefore just consumption oriented rather than productive. While in terms of political economy, in observing the Ottoman Empire, perhaps there is some truth in that, but there is a huge problem there in terms of Islam not facilitating development. Yes, Islam does not facilitate, rightly so, capitalist development, but Islam has its own. But in responding to that, therefore, because he suggested that the Protestant spirit played an important role, Protestant ethics, work ethic. And therefore, in responding to that, within the capitalist system, there is this idea that within the existing system, without touching the system, if we can bring the Islamic business ethics, we will solve the problem. In other words, just the behavior, but not the structure. So a Muslim behavior in economy and finance, in business, Islamic business ethics, within the existing system, as long as I, as a Muslim, I have the Islamic behavioral norms in my businesses, everything will be solved. No, that's not a solution. That's important, essential, because we have to develop those qualities, those behavioral norms. But look at, when Prophet ﷺ moved from Mecca to Medina, okay, he created a new political economy. What was that? He went to the Ansar and told them that the Muhajir, the immigrants, that he's making them as shareholders. He didn't ask the Ansar to give charity to the Muhajirun and to the immigrant Muslims coming from Mecca. So it wasn't giving charity. He made them shareholders, okay? So shareholder-based political economy. Second, yes, they were Muslims, but they were initially operating in the existing two markets in Medina. But Prophet ﷺ established the Islamic market, okay? It did not exclude non-Muslims to come to that market, but he wanted the Muslim behaviors and complement it with the structure. So Muslim behavior, Muslim business ethics, but can be expressed properly within the existing structure, the new structure. And that's an important part. Yes, Muslim Islamic business ethics important, has to be essentialized. Even within capitalism, we have to express that, but the story doesn't finish there. Islamic business ethics has to be complemented with the necessary structure, such as Islamic organizations, Islamic institutions, including Islamic markets, so that the behavior can be complemented with structure. Okay, agency, individual needs the necessary structure to be able to express those qualities. So in the short run, yes, Islamic business ethics within the existing system, how we can get the good Muslims to produce good outcomes, but we have to go beyond that to search for structures. Because the problem with the hybridity, because being within the capitalist system, we being Muslims, we are creating this hybrid identities. But the problem with the hybrid identities is that it prevents you to search for authenticity, authentic outcomes in the end. And that's the problematic part. So we have to prevent it. Secondly, I had in the presentation, but we didn't have time, like you want to produce the best car available, okay, by getting the best parts from the best cars in the world, okay? X car, the engine is the best, so you take the engine from there. The Y car has the carburetor, is the best carburetor from that. You bring it. So you bring all the best parts from each, the best cars in the world, and together, put them together to build the best car that is possible. No, it's not going to work, because it's not the parts. What is important, what connects them makes it best. So therefore, by bringing together different institutional logics to produce the best is not possible, because the ontology will determine the outcome. So that's important for us to consider. The third question again, sorry, I missed it. What was the third question?
About the term sustainability, that right now scholar change it with Tayyibah. How is it? What do you think about it?
Okay, as an extension of the maqasid, therefore, because maqasid that has been imposed on us, it is only intentional. Therefore, it doesn't look at the consequence. Okay, if you do those 5 categories, Ghazali, and therefore you will end up with completing the maqasid. However, the consequence. So therefore, Tayyib refers to consequence that I was referring earlier, because it is not only intention but the consequence. So the consequences have to be produced in the end, and therefore Tayyib concept is a right concept to use to reach to sustainability as a consequence. But what is important, rather than narrowing ourselves, rather than constraining ourselves with the Ghazalian, we have to move into more policy-related understanding of maqasid in order to even get the Tayyib concept to be working. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Prof.
You're most welcome.
All right.
I'm very get a new insight from you, Prof. Alhamdulillah. May Allah give you double and multiple reward, Prof.
To all of us, so that we can work together to make the world better, inshallah.
Okay. All right, Prof. This is the this is the last question from Bapak Ferry Prasetya. We have 2 questions. The first one is, how do the principle of Islamic moral economy, which emphasize fairness, justice, and social welfare, inform the development and implementation of economic policy within the context of modern nation state, particularly in relation to taxation, wealth distribution, and economic justice? And the second question is, given the diversity of interpretation and cultural variation within the Muslim world, how can a universal framework of Islamic moral economy be constructed? And what role should it play in guiding economic and political decisions across different regions and contexts?
Wonderful questions. Thank you. I always say that Indonesians will make a difference, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah.
Amazing questions and amazing learning. This is important. These are essential questions, and thank you for raising them. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to go through, but again, if I share this one, and then I'll respond through that. Now, the question, of course, the important question that we have in front of us, Islam is universal and nation state is particular. And therefore that particularity creates certain problems. Okay, let's take up, for instance, you have Islamic finance industry in any country, in quite a number of countries in the Muslim world. But Islamic logic is not applied to Islamic finance, and rather nation states rule that is based on Western capitalism has been imposed. Just to give you a small example, when we go to class to define what is Islamic banking and finance, we would say that it's profit and loss sharing, for instance. Yeah, profit and loss sharing. But when you look at the practice, as the data I shared, is mostly debt-based products is used in Islamic banking rather than profit and loss sharing. So one major problem, the logic difference, and that is because they are constructed or organized around shareholder value maximization. Again, the existing structure, the nation state creates that. Two, the regulation. So you go to central banks and look at their websites, they will say that the financial intermediation in the country has to follow Basel criteria. Now, Basel criteria. So when you go to Basel criteria, when you impose Basel criteria to Islamic banks, by definition of risk management practices, they are not going to be able to practice any profit and loss sharing. Immediately collapses. Okay, so the Islamic logic versus the conventional logic imposed. And the nation state, by definition, has the conventional logic, the constitution, the regulations, the governments. So therefore, at least in the short run, okay, at least in the short run, if we can argue, rather than countries, whichever the country that we talk, rather than producing Islamic banking law, which entirely forces Islamic banks, okay, to become conventional in this sense, we have to ask the governments to produce a particular regulation in relation to the need of Islamic banks, okay? So that's important for us because what happens, this grafting process happens. So what we are expecting, the normal outcome, the value system of Islam, together with the norms and the cognitive repertoire, defines the roles, and hence theory, concept, and institutions emerge. Yeah, that's the expectations that we have. But the external forces are so strong, it tells you that, look, you sound very good, but unfortunately within the market system, it doesn't work. And therefore, I have to reshape you. I have to graft you. And as you can see, rather than the thick arrows, value, norms, roles, the arrow goes the other way around now in the market system. So what happens? The neoclassical economics, shareholder value maximization, market system, IMF, Basel, including IOF and IFSB, will say that, look, guys, we have to, this discourse you have, profit and loss sharing, prohibition, and all that, it sounds very good, but unfortunately it won't work. So we have to get you to work within the existing system. So they start to graft you through the bottom up. And therefore the dotted arrows, if you follow the dotted, so all these institutions will tell you that, look, your theories, concepts, and banks are good, but it's not going to work. And therefore we have to define, you have this definition of riba. Okay, the definition of riba, what is definition of riba? Oh, it's only financial transactions, therefore we will understand it. No, riba is not there to facilitate financial transaction in an instrumental manner. What is the definition of riba? Is relating to defining what capital is. Okay, so riba prohibition relates relegating the power of capital as a stakeholder to the same level with other stakeholders. So domination has to be prevented, and therefore riba is prohibited in the process. Okay, but no, it says that's because that's a system problem. That's a political economy issue. We cannot have that because we have the capitalist model. Zakat. What is zakat? Zakat, again, because Allah created all the resources to be available for everyone to have access. No. That would not be possible because capitalist economy cannot facilitate that. And therefore, zakat is a compensation because you privatize the resources, prevent people to have access. Therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran directly that we have to compensate that. Okay. So as a result of that, as you can see, the existing market system, its own institutions, including nation states, grafts us, defines the roles, defines the norms and values. Just to give an example, organized tawarruk. Islamic Fiqh Academy published in its majmu'ah, in its magazine, that organized tawarruk is haram. Okay, it's haram. Indonesia is not involving in organized tawarruk. But look at your neighbors or the other countries, Malaysia and other countries. Organized tawarruk heavily dominant. Now, Islamic Fiqh Academy tells you it's haram. That's the universal. But your nation, because the interest is nation, is considered as a market economy. So the market economy within each nation says that, look, we have to facilitate liquidity. Okay. So what happens then? Each Islamic bank Sharia board allows organized tawarruk to be implemented, despite the fact that Islamic Fiqh Academy said it is not halal. So as you can see, the national priority replaces the Islamic priority. Islamic position is the haram, nation priority is halal. So market determines the result. It is not the Allah. Okay, so unfortunately, the equation turns the other way around, as you can see in this grafting process. And therefore, of course, the differences between one nation to another, as I mentioned, is inevitable, as we have discussed that. There are differences in terms of capital, habitus, and the field from one nation to another. However, what is important, therefore, as we identified, this vertical construct, the benchmark has to remain, and then the social constructivism relating to each nation, depending on its field, capital, and habitus, can demonstrate differences. Because you have different resources, Saudi Arabia has different resources. You have different capital, Saudi Arabia has different. You are entirely sea-bound islands, Saudi Arabia is desert and oil. And all those differences, of course there will be, but what is important, the benchmark model. And therefore the nations have to get as closer as possible to the benchmark model. Therefore, in the current practice, what you have, rather than allowing universality, ontology, determining market and political frame, the nation states determines the ontology of Islam, shapes the ontology of Islam through all those practices, including Basel criteria and etc. So therefore, the universality of Islam, by recognizing the differences in each geography, as opposed to the objectives of the nation state. Liquidity expansion, the objective of nation state, forces Islamic banks to do the organized tawarruk, as opposed to Islam suggesting that no, what is important, the Islamic objectives of allowing individuals to achieve falah and achieving societies, allowing societies to achieve ihsan. So these are the contentious objectives in each case, and therefore, at least within the nation state, what we have to argue, rather than introducing Islamic banking laws, which constitutionally, of course, defines capital in a particular way, defines labor in a particular way, define other stakeholders in a particular way according to market economy, rather than therefore giving us the same banking law, same financial law. We need to have entirely different banking law and different regulations for Islamic banks. Therefore, the particularities of Islamic banking can be possible even within the existing system. But our objective, of course, has to be creating this Falah-oriented and the Ihsan-oriented political economy and Ihsani governance. That is, of course, long-term project, but at least in the short term, we have to force the nation states that we are living in to produce outcomes or to produce laws that allows the particularities of Islamic banking and finance to be able to articulate it rather than grafting Islamic banking and finance according to their own definition of what capital is, what labor is, what other stakeholders are. So these are important issues for us to consider. Thank you for raising such an important political economic question.
Thank you, Prof. All right, it seems that we might need more information from your slide. So if you don't mind, the committee will contact you later and may, can we get your material for us to study more about this kind of interesting topic, Prof?
Yes, we have to increase the awareness. We have to look into how to make life better, that Rahmatul Alamin, how we can express that Rahmatul Alamin, rather than just look at the Rahmat for the capital owners.
Yeah. All right. So I believe that we still have question or topic to be discussed, but due to limited time, I think we need to end up our discussion session. So participants, ladies and gentlemen, we finally come to the end of this guest lecture session. So before I close the session, I would like to take some highlight points from today's 3-in-1 program. Let me wait a minute. Okay. So there are 2 points that I can note is that we need to reformulate our equation to overcome economics and social condition and achieving the real sustainability. This includes adding components from a comprehensive understanding about Islamic moral and political economy, such as human, environment, society, and so on. And then the second is that Islamic moral economy goes to the extent of removing barriers so that everyone can have access in an attempt to emancipate and empower individuals through expansion of Ihsan. So finally, I would like to thank once again to Prof. Mehmet Asutay for very informative and interesting presentation, and Bapak Ferry Prasetya for joining us throughout the session, and all of the participants for their active participation. Hopefully, this 3-in-1 program will be beneficial for everybody. Thank you, everyone, and please keep updated about our series. We still have more series and more topic. It's really comprehensive one about economics, banking, and finance. Thank you. See you in the next series. Thank you, Prof. Mehmet.
Thank you very much for having me.
Professor
Wishing you the
Mehmet.
best.
Yeah.
Bye.